Hello and welcome to Stories Behind the Songs. I'm your host, Jim Tompkins. In each episode, I uncover the fascinating backstories behind some of rock and pop's greatest hits. Today's song is Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd. Shine On You Crazy Diamond is a fascinating song consisting of 8 different parts and totaling over 20 minutes in length. The song both opens and closes the Wish You Were Here album. It's an ode to a former bandmate with a completely unexpected twist. It helped define the Pink Floyd sound in the mid-'70s, and it's a great example of turning a negative situation into a positive outcome. To understand Shine On You Crazy Diamond, we must roll on back to the foundations of Pink Floyd. In 1963, several students studying architecture at London Polytechnic formed a band, which included Roger Waters and Nick Mason. At the same time, another guy named Sid Barrett was studying at Camberwell College of Arts and eventually joined them. The band cycled through a number of names, including the Megadeths, the Abdabs, the Screaming Abdabs, Leonard's Lodgers, the Spectrum 5, and finally settled on the Tea Set. Presumably, that's because they practiced in a tea room in the basement of the Polytechnic School. In 1965, Sid Barrett took over as the band's frontman, which is the same year they rebranded as the Pink Floyd Sound, named after 2 bluesmen whose records Barrett had in his collection, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. In 1966, the band began experimenting with longer instrumental songs, with more tracks being penned by Sid Barrett. In August 1967, Pink Floyd released their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, with all but 3 of the songs being written by Barrett. The album amazingly was recorded at the same time and place as the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, at EMI Studios in Abbey Road in London. Following the release of the album, however, there was a problem. Sid Barrett had gotten heavily into drugs, and following the album's release, began behaving more and more erratically. In interviews and performances from this period, he seems completely emotionless and stoic. Partly this was a consequence of his heavy use of psychedelic drugs, such as LSD. Once a joyful and friendly guy, he became depressed and withdrawn, experiencing hallucinations, disorganized speech, memory lapses, intense mood swings, and periods of catatonia. In 1968, he was ousted from the band, or perhaps a better way to describe it would be that he fizzled out of the band due to lethargy, inconsistency, and absence from band activities. Following his departure, Pink Floyd went on to release at least 1 album per year through 1972, constantly honing their sound and gaining in popularity. Then in 1973, the launch into superstardom took place with the release of Dark Side of the Moon. This album hit number 1 on the U.S. album charts and in a number of other countries. By one measure, it's been logged as the all-time 3rd best-selling album worldwide. As the calendar turned into 1974, the band found themselves in an unusual position. They'd been a band now for over a decade, and after striving for stardom for so long, they'd achieved it. "Oh, look, we're rich," Roger Waters said. "We set out to achieve what we set out to achieve. What do we do now?" After a couple of false starts and lacking in motivation, they began the process of recording the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon, which would be titled Wish You Were Here. As Roger Waters said, one of the things that got them going was simply boredom. "None of us were feeling terribly inspired," said Nick Mason, who recounted how they spent days listlessly firing an air rifle at a dartboard while waiting for inspiration to hit. Prior to this, the band spent 8 weeks at Abbey Road Studios making music without using conventional instruments, such as creating a bass line by playing an elastic band stretched over a matchbox, a drum beat by striking a block of wood with an axe. "I think it was a delaying tactic because we didn't know what else to do," drummer Nick Mason admitted. Roger Waters commented that, "At times the group was there only physically. Our bodies were there, but our minds and feelings somewhere else." It was Roger who eventually made a decisive move. He ditched a couple of projects they were working on and suggested turning Shine On You Crazy Diamond into the opening and closing tracks on the album. In the meantime, he began writing new material to fill in the middle section of the album. Shine On You Crazy Diamond was written like a lot of Pink Floyd songs, with bits of musical ideas coming out of various people. The first one, the key sound, came from David Gilmour. It was a 4-note guitar sound, which was the starting point that the band worked from. Slowly, a theme emerged for the album: absence. The absence of inspiration, the absence of wives and relationships, as both Roger Waters and Nick Mason were about to get divorced. and most of all, the absence of Sid Barrett. Shine On You Crazy Diamond really evolved to be a tribute to Sid. The song's like a musical elegy to him, since he was so responsible for the early success that put Pink Floyd on the map. The song was initially intended to be a side-long composition, but was ultimately split into two parts and used to bookend the album. Not only that, but the different halves of the song were broken up into different parts. The opening half has parts 1 to 5, and the closing half has parts 6 through 9. It was toward the end of the recording of the album that a heavy-set man with a completely shaved head and eyebrows wandered into the studio. Nobody recognized him. They assumed he was there as part of the production. At that moment, the band was listening to the playback of the chorus to Shine On You Crazy Diamond. The whole episode was recounted by Richard Wright. Roger was there, and he was sitting at the desk, and I came in and I saw this guy sitting behind him. Huge, bald, fat guy. I thought, he looks a bit strange. Anyway, so I sat down with Roger at the desk, and we worked for about 10 minutes. And this guy kept on getting up and brushing his teeth and then sitting, doing really weird things, but keeping quiet. And I said to Roger, "Who is he?" And Roger said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, I assumed he was a friend of yours." And he said, "No, I don't know who he is." Anyway, it took me a long time, and then suddenly I realized it was Sid after maybe 45 minutes. He came in as we were doing the vocals for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which was basically about Sid. He just, for some incredible reason, picked the very day that we were doing a song which was about him. And we hadn't seen him, I don't think, for 2 years before. That's what's so incredibly weird about this guy, and a bit disturbing as well. I mean, particularly when you see a guy that you couldn't recognize him, and then for him to pick the very day we want to start putting vocals on, which is a song about him, very strange. Roger Waters reportedly was reduced to tears due to Sid's appearance. When someone tried to break the ice by asking Sid how he'd put on so much weight, he maniacally replied, "I've got a very large fridge in the kitchen and I've been eating a lot of pork chops." When someone asked what he thought of the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond, he said it sounded a bit old. Sometime later on, as the band were celebrating David Gilmour's recent wedding, he slipped away. That was the last time the Pink Floyd members saw him, save for Roger Waters, who ran into him one time in a department store. The lyrics to Shine On You Crazy Diamond tell a story of a once shiny and bright star that has lost its shine and fallen into darkness. The first verse flashes back in time to when Sid was full of life with so much potential.
Remember when you were young, you shone like the sun. Shine on you.
The second verse leaps to the present and talks about Sid Barrett's current and very different state.
Now there's a look in your eyes, like black holes in the sky.
The phrase, like black holes in the sky, is striking and suggests the struggle with childhood stardom, but imploring him to carry on and shine.
You were caught in the crossfire of childhood stardom, blown on the steel breeze.
The imploration to shine on is repeated in every chorus. The Crazy Diamond is a direct reference to Sid's nickname within the band. The song as a whole speaks to Sid Barrett's mental state, but also to the pressures of reaching stardom at a young age and the heavy machinery of the music industry. It delves into the tensions between a rising star and the pressures that produces. At the same time, it pleads with him to carry on and shine like you did when you were younger. Its legacy is of a song that bookends one of Pink Floyd's greatest records. Wish You Were Here as a whole hits upon that theme of absence, of missed potential, of the struggle with stardom, and of the hope to carry on no matter the circumstances. It was a brilliant accomplishment of turning a difficult situation into a positive outcome. As a follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon, it's a tremendously successful effort, without a weak spot on the entire album. For chart performance, it went to number 1 in both the UK and US and many other countries. It's gone 6 times platinum in the US, with worldwide sales of over 20 million copies. Within the Pink Floyd discography, only Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall have outsold it. Beyond anything else, Shine On You Crazy Diamond tells the story of Sid Barrett, of his childhood brilliance, of his youthful stardom and all his potential, and how not everyone can escape the grip of the downside of fame and of life. Here are some other interesting facts about Shine On, You Crazy Diamond. In 2004, Pink Floyd was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Shine On, You Crazy Diamond was played during the band's induction ceremony. An interesting thing about the album Wish You Were Here, there are really only 4 unique songs on the entire album: Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and Wish You Were Here. For Wish You Were Here, there was one sound they kept from their previous effort to make an album out of non-instruments: the note made by running a finger around the edge of a wine glass filled with liquid. These tuned wine glass notes are heard at the very beginning of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. For the song Have a Cigar, English folk singer Roy Harper wound up singing the lead vocal. He was a friend of the band's, and apparently both David Gilmour and Roger Waters recorded vocal parts for that song, but neither version seemed to work. Roy Harper was recording music in another room that day and came in to watch Pink Floyd record for a bit. He noticed they were having trouble with the track and decided to give it a shot by recording his own voice.
Come in here, dear boy, have a cigar, you're gonna go far. You're gonna fly high.
The band liked it, and they used it. Starting with 1973's Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd began releasing albums every 2 years, then took 4 years to complete their final album with Roger Waters, The Final Cut. Prior to Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd had released 7 albums in 6 years. The mid-70s seems to be the time when rock bands started taking longer to release albums than they did in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Shine On You Crazy Diamond was the last song Richard Wright got a writing credit on before Roger Waters kicked him out of the band during the Wall sessions. He would later rejoin the band in 1987 after Roger Waters left. If you look at the words Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Shine, You, and Diamond spell out Sid, which is perfectly appropriate for this classic Pink Floyd song. That wraps up the story behind Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll be back soon with another story behind a great rock and roll song.